Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabarty and we are coming to you live on Monday afternoon. Today is September 16th and we have some breaking news that the Carolina Panthers are deciding to bench number one overall pick from 2023 Bryce Young and move forward with Andy Dalton as their starter. So we're going to be just breaking down that entire situation, how we got to this place, and I'll be giving my thoughts on whether or not this is the right decision and whether or not Bryce Young will ever be able to work his way back into that starting quarterback role for Carolina. Then we're going to dive into the remainder of the games, some of the biggest moments from the week 2 action that we saw this past weekend. The Chiefs pulling off a comeback win against the Cincinnati Bengals. We saw the Cowboys get demolished at home by the Saints. We'll be talking about both the shortcomings there and also are the Saints a real contender in the NFL this season. And then finally, we will be ending off the show with the biggest upset of the week, which saw the Baltimore Ravens falling to the Las Vegas Raiders. So a whole lot to dive into today. But before we do all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports, whether you have a quick comment or a thoughtful question. We want to hear what you have to say as we try and make this show as interactive as possible. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can use the super chat feature, or you can go to the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is gsmcpodcast.net. If you leave a comment along with a tip or donation, your comment will pop up on screen for everyone to see. Anything would be very greatly appreciated there. We have some breaking news that the Carolina Panthers have decided to bench Bryce Young for the foreseeable future. We look here. The Carolina Panthers are benching quarterback Bryce Young for the foreseeable future and are planning on moving forward here with Andy Dalton as their starter. The Panthers have been a mess for the past couple years. They decided to trade up to the number one overall selection in 2023 and take Bryce Young, and since then they have won just 3 games, and don't seem to be headed in any sort of a great direction here. As meanwhile, while the Panthers are struggling, number 2 overall pick CJ Stroud is thriving in Houston. Not totally fair to compare the two based off of the vast differences in their situations, but regardless, the Panthers have just been treading water, and you look at what's been going on here with Bryce Young, and when you look at him on the field, he looks squirrely and jumpy and does not look comfortable whatsoever. You look at him when he's walking back to the sideline, and it just looks like a player whose confidence is absolutely shot. And that's why when you talk about quarterback development in the NFL, that's why it's so predicated on, do you have an offensive line? Do you have reliable weapons to throw to? Because Bryce Young, while I was never extremely high on him in the first place coming into the NFL, they do throw him in immediately, and he has had just a mess of a situation around him. He looks so lost out there at times, taking bad sacks, holding onto the ball too long, not seeing defenders. All of it has been a bit disastrous up to this point, where at this point he has played 18 games in his career. He has 11 passing touchdowns to 13 interceptions. This year has been off to an abysmal start for the Carolina Panthers, where just this past weekend they were blown out by the Los Angeles Chargers 26-3, and they have already been outscored by 60 points in just 2 games. And for Bryce Young, it's really unfortunate to see how all of this has played out for him. Somebody who was, of course, a Heisman winner when he was at Alabama and was highly touted coming into the league. But that being said, there are definitely some issues within his own personal development there where he hasn't taken steps that he's needed to get better, but additionally just the bad situation around him has sort of forced him into this purgatory where he's just kind of being thrown out there to the wolves on a weekly basis, and opposing teams are sort of teeing off on him. And again, it's very unfortunate, obviously, for him to see that, but if you know anything about the NFL and professional sports in general, sympathy only gets you so far. And now Bryce Young is going to be sitting on the bench for the foreseeable future. Andy Dalton taking over for the Panthers. So we'll see whether or not, I believe it was last year, Andy Dalton was the quarterback to lead the Panthers to one of their 3 wins. So Dalton, obviously a veteran of the game, can hope to be a little bit of a stabilizing factor. But up to this point, the Bryce Young trade has been a disaster for the Panthers, where I never feel like it's a good sign anyways when you are trading your number 1 pass catcher, the only player on your offense that is a solidified, reliable starter, in order to get your quarterback to throw him out there with a bunch of subpar talent, where the Panthers traded DJ Moore, obviously the target I'm referring to specifically, the 9th overall pick in 2023, a 2nd round pick in 2023, a 2024 first rounder, and a 2025 second rounder. So 3 of those 4 picks have essentially become pieces now. Darnell Wright, the offensive tackle, he was taken with the 9th overall pick. The Bears decided to package the 61st pick to move up 5 spots to draft Tyreek Stevenson, who had a phenomenal rookie season as one of the Bears cornerbacks. And then, the big one of them all is the 1st overall pick in this past year's draft, which resulted in Caleb Williams. For whatever it's worth, it's not like Caleb has been lighting the world on fire, so that would sort of be doubly as painful for Panthers fans who are already seeing CJ Stroud become one of the best quarterbacks in the league already, and then add to that on top of it the idea that Caleb Williams could also potentially be a long-term franchise quarterback. So we'll have to see there. And we'll still have to see with Bryce Young, because things are really, really bad right now in Carolina, obviously. But I'm sure the idea is that they can sort of try and work their way back to getting to Bryce Young. Dave Canales, their first-year head coach, he has a reputation for being able to help out quarterbacks that are a little bit of a reclamation process. We saw that with Baker Mayfield last season, and we saw it with Geno Smith in 2022. So this is a situation where Bryce, it seemed like, again, from a confidence perspective, he was pretty much shot at this point, and they needed to find some sort of a way to build off of things in a positive manner moving forward here. Again, they've been outscored 73-13 in just 2 weeks so far. That is just a crash course for a disaster start to Canales' tenure. And I'm sure the Panthers would love for Bryce Young to be the reason for that, or at least be a part of it. But at this current moment, it doesn't really feel like a realistic option. And the Panthers have a long way to go from here. So I'm sure that people are going to start speculating on, are the Panthers going to try and trade Bryce Young and maybe draft a quarterback next year? I would hold off on that conversation. We are still just coming out of week 2. Week 2 hasn't even officially ended yet. We still have a Monday Night Football game tonight. So there's a ton of time left in the season, and I would have to guess that the Panthers are going to try and revisit this by the end of the year. Unless they go on some sort of a miraculous win streak, I don't see the Panthers hoping to stick with Andy Dalton for the next 15 games. And like I mentioned, they are a mess pretty much from top to bottom anyways. So it is a situation where they are absolutely hoping that Bryce Young can sort of find his way back into the mix of things, but this is a brutal, brutal start to a career for Bryce Young, and ultimately, I don't know how optimistic I would be about that being the case, but also you talk about just the roster as a whole and how many different areas they also need to step up in. Sure, last week Bryce Young was really, really bad. 18 of 26, just 84 yards and an interception. I mentioned one of the sacks he took as well. Just seemed like he was out there. And again, super skittish was sort of the energy I was watching from him. But, he has good athletic tools behind his game. I know that he's undersized at the NFL level, and that alone is something that I would definitely be concerned about moving forward. But, he was able to still have success, and a lot of success at Alabama. But now he's in a situation where it is probably the worst wide receiver core in the NFL. Definitely bottom two, I would argue. Them and the Patriots are both pretty bad situations there. You look at the running back room, not a ton of talent. The offensive line hasn't been doing him any favors. And you just look, up and down the roster, and there are a lot of areas they need to address. So I would have some hesitations about the Panthers already moving off of Bryce Young. They invested so much into that trade anyways that they probably would prefer to find their way to make this thing work out for them. I'm sure maybe using a day 2 pick or so on a quarterback could be something worthwhile for them, but I don't think that we've seen the last of Bryce Young in a Panthers jersey just yet. But again, ultimately, it's been really bad. It doesn't feel like this is something that's headed in the right direction. I would like to give Dave Canales maybe some time to see if he can work with Bryce Young behind the scenes. Maybe him just stepping away is something that is necessary for now for him to be able to rebuild his confidence. But either way, this is basically the worst case scenario for Panthers fans as to how this has all been formulating over the past couple seasons, and we're not even a quarter of the way through year 2, and Bryce Young is already seeing the bench. So, again, this is a very grim situation in terms of the overall direction of a franchise, but I feel like there's maybe still an outside chance that they could at least, at this point, it's just get Bryce Young to be even a serviceable quarterback while they do still have so many other areas on the roster that they need to build up, and they can hope that maybe along the way, Bryce Young can be somebody that is worthy of getting a second contract extension. I mean, we'll see. Doesn't feel great at this moment, but ultimately, Andy Dalton is the option moving forward here. And Dalton, he's a fine option. I know, obviously, at this point, 36 years old, turning 37 in about a month, that you don't feel great about the idea of Andy Dalton, being your long-term starter here, but at least to sort of be able to take over the reins, help the Panthers just be more competitive in games even. Obviously, the defense got absolutely ran through in week 1 against the Saints, but this was a game against the Chargers that it felt like they had a pretty good chance. The Chargers still sort of a bit of an up-and-coming, new group under Jim Harbaugh, and instead they end up losing by 20 points. So something needed to change. I do worry about the overall quarterback developmental path of you are going to be our starter, we're going to bench you, and then we're going to come back to you. The most recent example, obviously, being Zach Wilson, and that definitely did not work out for them. But ultimately, I don't know how much of a choice that the Panthers had, because continuing to throw him out there week after week probably wasn't going to ever get him to the place that he needed to be anyways either. So, I mean, this is looking like one of the worst deals and trades in recent NFL history, but it's something that I do feel like just giving Bryce Young a chance to sort of recoup on the bench might be enough to help push them in the right direction. But even that being said, there is still so many problems that I have with this roster as a whole that it doesn't feel like this is an overnight fix for them from both the quarterback position and just the roster as a whole. Obviously, Bryce Young gets all of the attention because he is the quarterback who has been so mightily struggling on this bad football team, but it does go beyond the quarterback position alone, in my opinion. So we'll have to see what the Panthers do from here, but obviously not a storyline that I was anticipating seeing this morning, but it does ultimately, I think it was the right decision for them. Let me know whether or not you think this was the right move for them, but we are going to be moving on to some of the other action from the NFL this weekend, starting with what I thought was the top game of the slate, the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Kansas City Chiefs. We saw the Chiefs pull off yet another game-winning drive and a comeback victory, but is it time for the Bengals to panic? Where do the Chiefs stand now where they get this win, but they lose Isaiah Pacheco for the foreseeable future? We're going to be breaking down all of that, but before we do so, we have to take a quick break. So do not go anywhere, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into the Chiefs versus Bengals game. Really was the headliner of Sunday, in my opinion, and we saw the Chiefs pull off yet another comeback win under Patrick Mahomes to take this game 26-25. Now, that being said, my main takeaway from this game is actually more so on the losing side, and it's optimistic about the Cincinnati Bengals, where it was frustrating, I'm sure, for Bengals fans, where they totally folded on themselves, especially so in that fourth quarter. There was the Joe Burrow fumble at the beginning of the quarter that was returned for a touchdown to give the Chiefs the lead. The next drive, Jamar Chase is yelling at the refs, getting in their faces for a good 10 seconds, that ended up getting a personal foul that made the third down conversion basically impossible, and they had to settle for a field goal. The Bengals had chances to close out the Chiefs on their final drive as they were up. Burrow and Yosivas couldn't connect on a second down, ended up getting sacked on third down, giving the Chiefs back the ball, and as soon as that happened, we all sort of knew how this was going to go down, that you're giving Mahomes and the Chiefs a chance to walk you off, and that's exactly what they did. Especially considering the fact that, the Bengals actually had the Chiefs, it seemed like, in a 4th and 16. They end up sort of gift wrapping the win to the Chiefs with the pass interference call on that 4th and 16, which ultimately, it's a fine pass interference call. I don't know. I don't feel great about it still. I know that it was the right call, and that's totally fine. I'm the last person that's going to complain about the refs in this situation. It is just, I feel like I watched so much football yesterday, and I saw that contact not get called a number of times. But again, whatever. the Bengals had plenty of opportunities, like I just mentioned, to not blow this game, and ultimately it was the rookie in coverage there. He ended up jumping early, and that's what happens. Ends up being a pass interference that, sets the Chiefs up for that game-winning field goal. But again, although everything I just mentioned there in that fourth quarter was a bit disastrous, the Bengals still played a good game. And this is a team that everybody was writing off after that first week. And I think that this was at least good enough in my books to avoid panic breaking out. Now, I know some people are already there. I think that that's an overreaction to week one. But Burrow in the offense looked pretty good, all things considered. Burrow, 23 of 36, 258 yards, a couple touchdowns. The fumble was obviously a huge mistake from him. But so many people, it seemed like, were turning the page on Burrow as a quarterback, as a passer. This idea that he can only succeed when he has multiple star wide receivers. It's not like he lit the world on fire on Sunday, but he was good enough to win this game. Jamar Chase is definitely still off to a slow start, which isn't a great sign. 10 receptions for 97 yards through 2 games. That is most certainly not the production that we were expecting from him. I think that it'll change. Now, the vibes are a little bit scary in regards to the fact that Chase is talking about how he felt misled by the Bengals in the offseason and the whole contract negotiation process, him sitting out for the majority of training camp. But, he is just an elite talent. Joe Burrow and him have the connection going back to LSU, so I would bet money on this thing sort of coming around for Jamar Chase and the Bengals. But overall, I thought that the offense was pretty good. Definitely would want to get more out of their run game. Ended up just having 22 carries for 74 yards, a little bit underwhelming there. Maybe they're missing Joe Mixon a little bit. Ultimately, I don't know how much of an upgrade he would have been in this situation, but not the efficiency that the Bengals were hoping for on the run game. So that needs to be worked out. And then on the defensive side of the ball as well, I thought that they played well enough to win the game. Held Kansas City to just 286 yards and 20 points. Obviously, 6 of those coming from that defensive touchdown from Kansas City. But Mahomes didn't look good in this game. And, Mahomes really hasn't been excellent, I would say, these first 2 weeks. But, overall, still, it's Patrick Mahomes. That anytime you are able to limit him in that way, couple interceptions there, at least 1, maybe 2 more interceptions that were taken off the board due to penalties. And I was really encouraged by what I saw from that Cincinnati secondary to be able to sort of take the next step. This is a defense that was at the bottom of the league last year in terms of basically every significant stat, especially so in passing situations and overall total yards per game. I believe they were 31st in yards per game allowed. That we got to see some of these new additions, take big steps for them. Von Bell and Geno Stone, 2 very good safeties for them. Cam Taylor-Britt, although he did get burned on the Rashee Rice touchdown, I think made up for it at least to some degree with that absurd interception that he had. Thought he played pretty well throughout the game as well. And I think that there are a lot of pieces here on the Bengals defense that do sort of need to take the next step. Secondary was very good, like I mentioned. Front 7 got pushed around a little bit in the run game, and we're going to be going a little bit more into the run game for Kansas City in a moment here. But all of this to be said, that the Bengals, they played far from a flawless game and yet went toe-to-toe with the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, the Chiefs also did not play their best game by any means, but I think it just goes to show that the Bengals are not as far out of the picture as a lot of people are really making it seem like. I know 0-2 can be a detrimental mark to some degree, but the Bengals are one of the teams in recent history to start 0-2 and still make the playoffs. They did so in 2022. So I think that ultimately a lot of outside factors have been holding the Bengals down to some degree early on here, but I think they're going to be just okay. It helps as well, given the fact that the rest of the division hasn't been all that great, where, the Steelers are the only undefeated team, and I believe they've scored 1 touchdown in 2 games. The Bengals are going to get T. Higgins back, so I think that they are going to be just fine. Obviously, not where they would have hoped to be at this point in the season, but I'm not overreacting by any means. That's a tough game in Arrowhead, and again, one of those other things in the fourth quarter go differently. Can't play the hypothetical game like that, I know. But I think that they were most certainly in this game and, have a case for they maybe even outplayed the Chiefs as a whole. But, on the other side of this with Kansas City, we know who the Chiefs are. They're obviously the 2-time defending champions here, and they feel like they're on top of the world, and they did continue to show that to a lot of degree. Business as usual, just a casual Patrick Mahomes game-winning drive. But the big storyline for the Chiefs coming out of this game is the fact that running back Isaiah Pacheco did go down with an injury right inside that 2-minute warning mark. And ultimately, it was just reported on this morning that Pacheco has fractured his fibula. So he is expected to miss significant time. That is a brutal injury to suffer. Again, right at the end of the game as well. I think it sort of went a little bit under the radar, but that is a huge loss for the Chiefs. Pacheco has been incredible, really, for the past couple seasons, but in this game as well, 19 carries, 90 yards, and he has emerged as really the first workhorse running back that Kansas City has had in the Patrick Mahomes era. Now, that being said, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is on the team, and, he was one of those first running backs for Mahomes that maybe he could find some sort of resurgence. I wouldn't be banking on that. I do worry a good amount about the lack of depth with the Chiefs running backs. Now, they were lacking depth at pass catchers last year, and they still ended up winning the Super Bowl. So ultimately, you can't overreact too much to any degree, but the Chiefs have played in a couple close games, and now they're taking a huge hit to their offensive play style. I think what's been so impressive about the Chiefs is the fact that they have been able to sort of find that duality of the offense of, yes, you have Patrick Mahomes, he's excellent, but in games like yesterday where Mahomes isn't really clicking and Travis Kelce was absent for the majority of the game, he only got 3 targets in this game for 1 catch, so the passing game hasn't quite been as elite as we're used to, but the running game sort of had their back. 149 rush yards for the offense in that game, and you're knocked down a couple pegs as well in terms of you had more rushing yards than passing yards in this game if you're the Chiefs. And knowing that Pacheco is now going to be out for a lot of the season, that's a real concern in my eyes. Now, something that, yes, when you have Patrick Mahomes, I think you're going to be capable of overcoming just about anything. They seem to be big fans of their undrafted free agent running back, Carson Steele, who did have a fumble in this game, but ultimately it sounds like they're very high on behind the scenes there, and maybe he could emerge a little bit more for them. They trusted him enough even after the fumble to go back to Steele on that final game-securing drive. So there's that. We'll have to see there. But Pacheco being out is a real difference maker, in my opinion, for the Chiefs moving forward. But let me know what your takeaways were from this game. Let me know if you think I'm letting the Bengals off the hook too easily. I'm still a believer in them myself, but I know that a lot of people don't echo that same sentiment. So, again, Bengals, a team that I think there were a lot of positives to come away from with this week, but that being said, they didn't come away with a win. So they are 0-2. They do still have an uphill battle, but I'm choosing to believe in the process there with Joe Burrow and that Bengals team. But we are now going to be moving on to what was probably the most surprising result of the game of the day, and that was the Dallas Cowboys at home, where they were unbelievable last season, getting blown out to the New Orleans Saints. So we're going to be diving into all of that, but first we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Welcome into all of our live viewers. And we are going to now be diving into the Cowboys' blowout loss to the New Orleans Saints, a result that not many people were anticipating, myself included. Now, as we got closer to the game, I did end up leaning with the Saints plus 6.5, but to see it occur in blowout fashion in the way that it did was massively surprising to me. This is a Cowboys team, especially on the offensive side of the ball, that was elite when playing at home last year. And the offense was pretty lackluster, and the defense was a bit of an abomination, where the Saints, and we're going to be diving more specifically into the Saints in the next segment here, so I do want to save some of it there. But New Orleans has been putting on a bit of an offensive showcase these first couple games. Now, that being said, they also played the Panthers in that mix, and we just talked about the Panthers a couple segments ago, that's its own sort of category that I don't know how much you can put into stock into games against the Panthers, but 40 plus points per game in each of the last two, and they come into Dallas where it's a very talented defense in my opinion, even without the likes of Deron Bland, who's currently still dealing with an injury, and just blew the doors off of them. And it was probably a bad sign for the Cowboys, considering the fact that the Saints had effortlessly drove down the field in 4 minutes to score on their opening drive, faced one third down, didn't even face another third down until they had 21 points on the board, where they were able to hit Rashid Shaheed over the top for a long touchdown, and then the Alvin Kamara screen that also went 50 or so yards to score there. So this was a very, very underwhelming performance from Dallas's defense. Mike Zimmer is somebody that I think, even despite the fact that he's been out of football the past couple years, knows what he's doing, but Clint Kubiak just dialing up what was sort of a masterclass for this Saints offense to take it to Dallas. And, on the Cowboys side of this all, like we mentioned, defense was pretty atrocious for them for a lot of the game. And then offensively, I think it's more of a personnel issue than a coaching thing. Obviously, Mike McCarthy is somewhat to blame in all of this, and he is going to receive criticism, as he should, but I'm also not really surprised whatsoever by the lack of explosion on this Cowboys offense, where sure, they were able to stick it to the Browns in week 1, but I thought that was far more about the Browns being a little bit of a mess. I know they just won yesterday against Jacksonville, but Jacksonville is also one of these, really concerning teams up to this point, and the Cowboys just unable to really find any form of success on the ground. Now, part of that is partially due to the fact that they were trailing in the majority of this game, so they needed to sort of air it out a little bit more to try and fight their way back into this, but it's something that I'm still concerned with. Obviously, I've been talking about it for a couple months now. I don't really like the running back room that they have between Rico Dowell and Ezekiel Elliott. I think that their offensive line is one of the worst in the league, which is very un-Cowboys-like. And it's interesting. And Dak Prescott, I thought that ultimately he was pretty poor. He wasn't terrible. The couple interceptions that he had were really bad, but again, to some degree, this game was over before it even really started, with the Saints scoring touchdowns on each of their first 4 drives. So I'd be more concerned about the defense than I am coming out of the offense with this game. But, that being said, it does become a little bit interesting, and I feel like I'm sensing a little bit of a pattern here, and the financial repercussions don't even come in for Dallas in regards to that Dak Prescott contract for, another season or so. And that's the same with the Trevor Lawrence deal, the Tua Tagovailoa deal, the Jared Goff deal. None of these seem to be aging all that great. Now, we're just 2 weeks into the season. It's probably something that we'll do a deeper dive into, in the coming weeks if this trend continues. But you talk about a Cowboys team that was willing to let so many pieces walk in free agency. We're talking about the offensive line here. We're talking about Tyron Smith in that left tackle spot, Tyler Biotish at center. Both of them leave. A handful of key defensive players walk as well. Tony Pollard walks, and instead the Cowboys didn't bring all that many players in. Eric Kendricks was a solid addition for them, was their leading tackler in this game versus New Orleans. So, and linebacker was definitely a position of need as well. But let's also be realistic here. It's not like Eric Kendricks was some sort of a splash signing. We're talking about a player that has been dealing with some injuries in the past couple years. He's past his 30s now at this point. So I don't know if again, as much as Eric Kendricks is an upgrade over what they have had in recent years, still not saying a ton, and I still don't think that it's something that's really, moving the needle for me. Kendricks was able to play in every game last year, it appears at least. So, there's that going for them. But it seemed like the Cowboys were already sort of preparing, knowing that they were going to have to pay CeeDee and Dak, and eventually they're going to have to pay Micah Parsons. And as a result, they just sort of let all of these key pieces for them end up walking in free agency. And I have been on the record that I am usually pro paying the quarterback, because ultimately if you don't have a sufficient backup plan, your hands are sort of tied anyways, and having a good roster and some good individual players only gets you so far. But I am curious, what percentage of this past offseason and the Dak Prescott negotiation, or more so what their free agency plan was, how tied in that was with the idea that they knew they were about to shell out some big time contracts. And Dak, I'm going to give him maybe slightly more of a pass than I should based off of this performance against the Saints. I also think that Saints have a pretty solid defense as well. So, again, I'm giving a little bit of the benefit to the doubt there, but this is sort of the reality when you talk about dishing out $60 million to a quarterback that I do believe that Dak is a top 10 quarterback in the NFL, but I wouldn't call him elite. I don't think that many people would call him elite. And is he going to be good enough to sort of overcome the other flaws in the roster that were caused based off of the fact that the Cowboys had to pay him so much? And this game in particular would hint that the answer is no there. But that being said, you can't overreact too much. We're still in week 2 here, and the Cowboys did look very good, especially offensively, against what is a good Browns defense. I think that the Browns have their own sort of issues going on the offensive side of the ball, especially with both of their starting tackles missing the first couple games that Dallas was absolutely able to take advantage of. Micah Parsons was absolutely wreaking havoc in that game. But again, when you just talk about sort of, are you a quarterback that can overcome sort of the obstacles of not having quite as much talent around you once you get paid? Dak Prescott still has to answer that question a little bit. And that's not something that we're immediately going to get the answer to. He also still does have CeeDee Lamb, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Jake Ferguson did miss this game for whatever that's worth as well, but their offense feels to me pretty one-dimensional. And I don't know if there is anything that's sort of coming up the ranks for them to be able to take that next step forward. Now, I think the big thing, again, for the Cowboys is more so on that defensive side of the ball. If they are going to win games this year, they can't let that happen. Because the Cowboys, I just don't believe, are built to win shootouts like that on a regular basis. You take away CeeDee Lamb, if opposing teams, sort of bracket them off and send these double teams, where else is Dak really going to go with the ball? Now, Brandon Cooks, I believe it was the wide receiver that scored the touchdown for them in week 1. Like I mentioned, Jake Ferguson did miss this game. A fine tight end there as well. But you're just looking overall at an offense that I don't think is cut out to win games where each team is putting up 30 or so points. You need to be able to shut down the opposing teams, and that very clearly did not happen in this game. Now, again, New Orleans seems like it is a bit of a blossoming offense there under new offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak. So that's also sort of the direction I want to go here as well, is talking about, are the Saints actually building something here? Is this a team that NFL fans need to start taking seriously as playoff threats? We are going to be diving into that conversation, but before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and we just talked about the Cowboys getting dominated at home by the New Orleans Saints. I do think that there are a lot of concerns there for Dallas, not a team that I had as a playoff team coming into this season. I also definitely didn't have the New Orleans Saints as a playoff team, and they might be making me look stupid right now because we are coming off of back-to-back elite performances from this offense, and we are seeing a rejuvenated Derek Carr. And Derek Carr is somebody that I've always been a fan of since his time with the Raiders, and I know that there have been some very underwhelming moments with Derek Carr, even including last year, where the Saints, it felt like, were one of the more inconsistent teams in the NFL, especially on that offensive side of the ball. But 47 points in week 1 to the Panthers, so keep that in mind. But 44 on the road against a Dallas defense that, in my eyes, is pretty talented overall. That's when you start to really get my attention. And ultimately, the Saints are a team that, again, we're going off of a 2-game sample size, but they have been extremely fun to watch so far. Derek Carr has, like I mentioned, looked like a new version of himself, where last year we just saw so much mediocrity from both him, but also I would argue as well, just the entire offense was not what a lot of Saints fans were hoping for when they ended up going and signing Carr to a pretty lofty contract in free agency. And now we're looking at Carr through 2 games, completing 77% of his passes. He has 5 touchdowns to 1 interception. That interception did come in this game where he threw the ball a little bit high to Chris Olave, but we're seeing Olave back involved. Rashid Shaheed, the game record, one of the best names in the NFL and one of the fastest players in recent NFL history, 2 games and 2 bomb touchdowns to him. The one this week was even more so impressive because there were 2 defenders in the area. Derek Carr pretty much threw Shaheed open on that play, knowing the type of game breaker that he is. And that is another aspect here, is the fact that Derek Carr now has a little bit of chemistry with his teammates here in New Orleans, where it's a tough situation to sort of step in day one. Now, not to make excuses, because any quarterback that has signed a free agent contract has gone through this. It's not like Derek Carr is some sort of unprecedented obstacle in building up a new relationship with the Saints, but I don't know, maybe they're just that much more on the same page this year. I think that the running game, Alvin Kamara, a monster game from him in this game. Sort of, we've seen Kamara have these huge outings before, the 5 touchdown game in particular. Didn't quite get that, had to settle for 4 touchdowns in this game. Maybe if the Cowboys made it a little bit more competitive and they were still trying, that we could have seen some more touchdowns from Kamara. But I was blown away with the performance that we've seen. Underrated storyline that, the casual NFL fan isn't going to, really be paying attention to. But I think the most impressive rookie that I've seen so far is the Saints' first-round selection, Taliese Fuaga, the left tackle. He's been starting there. Week 1 against Carolina, again, only can do so much. But when you talk about Fuaga coming into this game, he's being lined up against Micah Parsons, and I thought he was excellent all the way throughout. Couple misplays specifically in the run game, but he has been giving Derek Carr all of this time to sort of, settle in, and just a little bit underrated there, I think. Also, their other top rookie that they selected, Kool-Aid McKinstry, the cornerback out of Alabama. He didn't play a ton in week 1 against the Panthers, but got a little bit more runway in this game, and I thought he looked really good. Some matchups that he had against CeeDee Lamb where he really caught my eye, especially the one in the red zone where he ended up having a pass breakup. We saw him go from 28 snaps in week 1 versus Carolina, just 47% of the Saints defensive snaps. This week, 61 snaps, 87%. And ultimately, I thought he looked really good. And that is a hugely significant storyline for the Saints moving forward, because they could, when you look at, whether or not they can develop into one of these top contenders, you are looking at a defense that has a number of young notable players that have stepped onto the scene. Brian Brzee, their first round pick from 2023 as well, still continues to get playing time. Marshawn Lattimore out in this game, which is what sort of opened up the opportunity for McKinstry to play more. You get him back. Paulson Adebo has been somebody who has really developed over these past couple seasons as well. Still a very good linebacking core with Demario Davis, and you add Willie Gay, who started for the Chiefs in their Super Bowl run. I think this is a very talented team across the board. Alontae Taylor as well, one of my favorite defensive backs to watch in the NFL. Hard-hitting nickel back there, so was their leading tackler in this game. And I just think that, the Saints are a team that as much as excitement that I genuinely have for them, you do have to take into consideration that they were a little bit of a hit-or-miss team in 2023, where they could go and have really impressive performances and then in the next week end up totally falling apart. And I think that was especially, prevalent towards the end of the season, where they did actually end on a pretty good note, where they won 4 of their last 5 games. Now, got to take into consideration as well, that is against Carolina and New York, 2 of those games. You also have Atlanta, where at that point, I don't even know. I can double check here who is starting. But either way, you're getting Taylor Heineke or you're getting Desmond Ridder in that game. Neither one of those are necessarily impressive wins in my books. It was Desmond Ridder with a little bit of Logan Woodside actually thrown in there as well. So, you got to take it with a grain of salt, that little streak that they were going on towards the end of the year. But that being said, internally, there is definitely something to the Saints came into this season with just a little bit more juice. And now with 2 straight wins and 2 straight incredible offensive performances, you're going to hope that they can continue to sort of build off of that. You're not going to score 40 points per game, of course, but Derek Carr, if he sort of just settles into his role here, they don't need him to throw for any crazy amount of passing yards. In fact, the past 2 games, as much as the Saints have, been pouring it on offensively, Carr has thrown for 200 yards against Carolina and 243 against Dallas. Now, part of that also being that they were blowout wins, didn't necessarily need to continue to rely on the passing game, and that's sort of its own other conversation of what does it look like with Derek Carr in 2024 when you need to throw your way back into a game. I think that that's still a question that needs to be answered, but all things considered, it is very hard for me to find areas to nitpick with this Saints team. I think that they are one of the biggest stories in the NFL this season so far. And obviously, still within the first 2 weeks, that whole lot of football left, but them and the Buccaneers as well, who look pretty impressive themselves, also 2-0, that this NFC South division, we'll still see about the Falcons. We do have them facing off against the Eagles tonight on Monday Night Football, which maybe will be a better gauge of where the Falcons are at this point, with a little bit of a longer week to recover from not a scoring-wise beatdown, but physically, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I thought the Falcons were sort of beat down and demoralized in that Pittsburgh game. That we'll see the temperature there, but so many people were just sort of chalking the Falcons in as that NFC South winner, and I myself had the Falcons winning as well. But even in those sort of projections, Buccaneers and Saints, it felt like, we know that they're a pretty good team, but I don't think that they're, one of the elite teams, and I still definitely am not jumping at calling either one of the Bucs or Saints elite teams, but, we're going to do an NFL tier list later this week, and I think that, the Saints and the Buccaneers, both of them climbing up here, and the Falcons, they got to be a little bit nervous. Not that, I am going to choose to freak out against a bad offensive performance against maybe the best defense in all of the NFL in week 1 for Atlanta, but and everybody was just sort of chalking them up as the division winner there in the NFC this year. And now all of a sudden you have 2 really scrappy teams that, are getting excellent seasons so far from some quarterbacks that a lot of people have written off, and Derek Carr and Baker Mayfield. And now I'm legitimately excited after last year, where truthfully none of the teams in the NFC South really moved me in terms of I want to watch these teams play. I definitely want to watch the Saints play. I definitely want to watch the Buccaneers play. Like I mentioned, we'll see about the Falcons. But, this is a division that could sneakily have 2 playoff teams, which how many people had that on their bingo card headed into this season? Now, we'll see. Obviously, don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but I love what I've seen from the Saints so far this season. Again, the combination of they have some veteran leaders in the likes of a Derek Carr and Alvin Kamara. You have Cam Jordan on defense, Demario Douglas on defense, but you also are getting real impact from some of these recent draft picks that it almost is meshing into this perfect combination of young talent and smart veterans that kind of feels like a team to me that can make some damage in the regular season and maybe even in the postseason as well. Also, I'm sure very, very few teams would want to go into New Orleans and the Superdome there to play a playoff game. So we'll see. Saints, though, love what I've seen from them so far, and I'm definitely keeping them on my mind. They do play against Philly at home next week, and I think that could be a game that could really give us some answers as to the legitimacy of this Saints team. So definitely marking that one as one of the marquee matchups of week 3. But let me know what you've thought about the Saints so far this season and the NFC South as a whole, which has sort of been a mixed bag in a couple different ways. A lot of surprises so far. Even with the Panthers, who we knew they were going to be bad. I didn't know they were going to be getting outscored by 60 in 2 weeks and benching their number 1 overall quarterback in 2 weeks into the season that bad. So a very, very wild division going on right there in the NFC South. But we are going to be shifting gears here and headed into our final segment of the day, where we saw the biggest upset of the regular season so far, as the Baltimore Ravens ended up falling to the Las Vegas Raiders, as the Ravens now fall to 0-2. So we're going to be talking about sort of what the overall panic level is there in Baltimore, as well as just sort of giving some credit as well to the Raiders, who I definitely was looking to count them out, but just as I was looking to do so, sort of roped me back in a little bit. Antonio Pierce and that team as a whole is just so infectious. So we're going to be diving into all of that. But first, we are going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we head into our final segment of the day, and we are going to be reacting to the loss, surprisingly, by the Baltimore Ravens against the Las Vegas Raiders. A game at home. Felt like a huge bounce back spot for Baltimore, who came, a shoe size short of beating Kansas City in Arrowhead to start the year. And now instead, they are 0-2, losing to the Raiders, who pulled off a fourth quarter comeback. And I think that this is a situation where I'm definitely not going to, go full panic mode here for the Ravens. But that being said, some of the concerns that I had for the Ravens coming into this season are already sort of showing their face a little bit. And the first of which is on the defensive side of the ball. Last year, they were the number 1 or number 2 scoring defense in the league. They were elite at all 3 levels and just had playmakers galore. Now, this offseason, you see the mastermind behind that defense in Mike Macdonald, who was their defensive coordinator. He leaves to take the head coaching job in Seattle, takes a couple key assistants with him, and additionally, you see the departures of the likes of a Patrick Queen, who heads out in free agency. He's now in Pittsburgh, and ultimately, I don't think that that's necessarily quite to the level of what I was expecting in terms of their passing defense has just been nowhere near good enough up to this point. And, part of it, maybe you can talk yourself into the fact that Nate Wiggins was unavailable for this game. Arthur Millette is on IR right now. So those are 2 notable cornerbacks in the secondary that you are hoping that can be part of a solution to this. But the fact that they came into this game against the Raiders had virtually no success on the ground in this game. I did think that the front seven for Baltimore was excellent, and that's something that I don't anticipate going anywhere. Obviously, you have your big name guys in Roquan Smith and Nnamdi Madubuike to sort of solidify the front there, but Odafe Owe had a really good game. Kyle Van Noy, who I don't even know how he played in this game after fracturing his orbital bone in his face, that he was even able to play in this game. But, they got production up there. Ultimately, I think it was 5 sacks against the Raiders here. But to have Gardner Minshew kind of carve to some degree, carve is maybe a little liberal there, but carve up the Ravens defense and throw for 276 yards. He had the interception, but after that, he was kind of lights out. And it's easy, obviously, when you're throwing to Devontae Adams, who, yet again showed that he's still one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Even when he had the drop in the red zone, he was able to make up for it by drawing a PI and then ultimately scoring a touchdown there. Brock Bowers also, I just gave some credit to Fuaga of the Saints in terms of most impressive rookies so far to me. Brock Bowers is up there in that conversation. 9 receptions for 98 yards in this game, that the Ravens just sort of got the ball moved on them, despite the fact that for Vegas, they had 17 carries for 27 yards in this game, and you allow 26 points. That is pretty concerning to me on the back end of your defense. Now, like I mentioned, some key pieces in that secondary that should be back within the next handful of weeks, that maybe there's some room for growth there, but that's something that I was concerned about heading into the year, that a bunch of moving pieces here. Their defense will probably take a step back. I just wasn't expecting them to take a step back in the passing game quite to the level that we at least saw in this game. I'll excuse sort of, whatever in the Chiefs game as well. Allowed 350 total yards there, but you're facing Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. So, again, not trying to overreact. We're 2 games in, just talking about what we've seen in 2 games, and that is the passing defense just not being good enough up to this point. And then on the offensive side of the ball, the issue of their offensive line just really not looking great right now. Lost 3 starters from last year to this year, and they haven't really gotten that same push from the running game. Derrick Henry started very slow in this game. I believe it was just 5 yards on his first 7 carries. Ultimately was able to have a big second half to, keep the Ravens ahead in this game for a while. Ended up with 18 carries, 84 yards, and a touchdown. That touchdown drive in the fourth quarter was very impressive from Derrick Henry. Still somebody that I feel like the Ravens would benefit from if they get him a little bit more involved throughout, but obviously the lack of a receiving threat there for Henry is something that's sort of keeping him off the field, maybe more than a lot of people would prefer. But also just the fact that this Ravens team just has not done a great job. And you know what? I will also, before I move off on the offensive line here, this is a very good Raiders defensive front. If they have any strength in their team, it is sort of that front seven where Max Crosby was causing havoc all game long. You have Christian Wilkins there as well. Robert Spillane, a name that isn't necessarily any sort of household name, but Spillane has emerged into a very good top linebacker in that Raiders defense as well. So I'm not saying that this wasn't a tough task for that offensive line, but I thought that Lamar was doing a lot of running around in the pocket, trying to evade people, and obviously they sort of I wouldn't say they lose the game on that final drive where they weren't able to pick up a first down. It was a tie game at that point, but they didn't even really give themselves a chance when Max Crosby comes screaming through the line of scrimmage and dropping Lamar for a loss. And, ends up being just 2 sacks in this game. If it weren't for Lamar Jackson being Lamar Jackson, I thought it would have been a handful more. And Lamar, a lot of people are sort of getting on his case for this game. It wasn't a great performance from him, but I'd be far more concerned with the defense again for the struggles in their secondary. Having their front seven step up the way that they did and having Gardner Minshew be the one to sort of be very efficient. I believe he was 30 of 38 in this game for 276 yards. That is just nowhere near good enough. And front seven sort of bailed them out to some degree. Raiders lost 43 total yards on those sacks. Like there are so few stats when you look at the box score of this game where it's like, okay, well, that's why the Ravens lost. I don't think that there's really any good justification for it. I thought that they just sort of continued to hurt themselves throughout. And I'm talking about, the secondary, an issue, offensive line, an issue. How about the penalties, though, in this game as well? 11 penalties, or 11 flags for 109 yards. Just no reason for that. And Derrick Henry was very good. Couple of false starts late in that game also did them no favors whatsoever. Just not really much of an excuse for being a running back, getting a false start. One of those plays included, it was a QB sneak. I think it was Isaiah Likely in. And Derrick Henry was just lined up in the backfield. He's not even ever going to get the ball in that situation. What are you jumping for? Not a very smart play from the veteran. Now, ultimately, I'm not panicking about the Ravens here. This was a really bad loss to an inferior Raiders team. That being said, though, I don't know if they just sort of got caught up in the moment or what. There were multiple times where it seemed like, okay, yeah, this game is over. It's now a 10-point game in the fourth quarter against Gardner Minshew and the Raiders. This is not a game that you lose, but ultimately, I don't know whether it was a lack of focus, whether it was just the incompetence of parts of that roster. You just can't let yourself blow that game. And ultimately, again, Lamar Jackson, not on his case here necessarily. And again, especially, he didn't play great down the stretch, but also when Max Crosby is right in your face, it's hard to make any plays really come to fruition. But this was a disappointing game for them, but like I sort of just mentioned as well on the other side earlier in this show about the Bengals being 0-2, nobody has really established themselves in that division where, like I mentioned, Bengals 0-2, the Steelers are 2-0, but they don't even know who their quarterback is going to be moving forward. I believe they've scored just one touchdown in their first two games against, couple tough defenses, not elite defenses on either end though. So, I don't know how much faith I can fully have in them. And then you have the Browns who are now back in the win column at least, but we're kind of on Deshaun Watson bench watch to some degree. I personally think the Browns are going to stick it out with Deshaun Watson through the majority of this year, probably the entire year, but a lot of people are at least speculating the idea of that Jameis Winston could be taking over there. So nobody in this division has all the answers right now. I think it would be foolish to get ahead of yourself. And I know some of the statistics surrounding what it's like for teams to start 0-2 and to make the playoffs. But my response to that as well would be, I highly doubt any of those 0-2 teams that miss the playoffs are as talented as the Ravens are. Now, I don't think that the Ravens are at the same level. I did think that they got worse over the course of the offseason, that, they're going to have some proving to do from here on out. I don't think that, I mentioned that there's 3 new starters for them. I don't even think they have an answer right now, really, at right tackle. Not sure what's been going on there between McCary and Rosengarten, sort of splitting snaps. I don't know if it's McCary getting injured or what, because it's not like Rosengarten has been, too impressive. But I'm also talking right tackle depth here, which doesn't really land with the majority of the audience. So I'll steer away there right now. But I think that ultimately, when you talk about where the Ravens are in their standing, they're still one of the best teams in the NFL. They still have one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. That you can never just count them out entirely, but you do wonder, with all of the missing, moving pieces from last season to this season, that it really doesn't surprise me all that much to see the slow start. But that being said, the beginning of their schedule is pretty tough, where we just saw them play the Chiefs. This Raiders game felt like one they kind of had to have. Now they are in Dallas next week, at home against the Bills, and then in Cincinnati in the following 3 games. I highly doubt they come out of all of that 0-5, but given what the schedule is, I don't think it's the most unrealistic thing in the world. I think they're going to come in next week and be pissed off big time and end up taking it to the Cowboys, who I think are also vulnerable right now. But I mean, this is not a situation they were hoping to be in to start off the season, feeling like they could have, they probably feel like they should have beat the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. And now here they are 0-2 facing, a few really tough teams in these next coming weeks. This is where the pressure starts to ramp up. I'm not in panic mode now, but I'm definitely not sitting comfortably right now, and I don't know how you could. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section for the Ravens moving forward. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. You can check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow, same time as always at 2:00 p.m. Eastern. We'll have reactions to tonight's game between the Eagles and the Falcons and more from the world of football. So till then, we will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.